Okay, so you're recording. Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm very good right now. I'm actually good. It's been a good day today after
Good. And
after
you're in BC,
a
right? Is it
I
warm,
am in BC.
cool,
It
winter,
is,
summer?
you know what? It's dry today. It is pretty warm. I don't know it's plus something. So
Okay, we're
whenever
above zero. Because you
we're
guys had a
above
bunch of
zero.
snow or something, right? You had
We,
like
we had like 3 days of snow last week, enough snow for kids to be tobogganing down hills. So it was some snow, but it was literally gone 3 days later.
did they call a snow day?
Well, I don't think they did this time, but my youngest son really was raised in Alberta. Like he
Yeah,
was born in Toronto, but moved to Calgary like when he was 3.
yeah.
So his whole life, he's never had a snow day until he moved to Vancouver.
Right, when it was
So,
-5, snow and the
yeah,
city shuts down because they don't have snow plows. I was
exactly.
born in Vancouver. That's how I know that. So from
Yeah,
birth to age 7, it would snow and it'd be wet, and they didn't have enough snow plows, so they just closed the city if the buses weren't
right.
running. So my mother still lives in Vancouver. She actually moved back. I'm in Calgary now. So here
Okay,
it's -40 and these 40 centimeters, and their snows are plowed, and it's fine. but,
exactly. I
but in
remember that
Vancouver,
very well.
they don't have to understand that. It's like nobody has snow tires. The hills
Yeah,
don't, like nothing is functioning. And I
no.
laugh because a -5 snow day is like ridiculous. And although we have Texas now that is understanding of the hurt.
I know. But you know, in there, and I didn't know anything about anything, right? But then I'm hearing like their houses are just built really weird too. Like, I mean, it's not
Yeah, they
even
don't have
built.
furnace, they don't have central
Yeah,
heating, they have air
like,
conditioning, but they don't have a thermostat that goes on if it gets cold.
right?
Like that's an infrastructure issue that like predates everything. Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
I was shocked. Anyways,
So that's
but
what
no,
they don't.
today, like I had a bit of a migraine before, but I am feeling much better
Good. Well, let's get into the truth. What is your truth on cannabis?
for sure.
This interview is meant to explore how different people have landed in the cannabis industry and what brought them here. We want to know more about you as a person and your history before coming into the industry and what brought you to the plant. And your career path since you've been part of that, and how your life has been impacted by the plant. Uh, do you agree to have us record and publish this interview for information purposes? This does not constitute any medical advice.
Yes, I do.
Awesome. And just for a reminder of our viewers at home or wherever they may be listening, that you are acknowledging that you are the legal age to purchase and consume cannabis in your region. This production is only for adults only in the
Yes, it
state or
is.
province in which you reside.
Yes, I am of age in BC.
Awesome.
You can see.
Cool. Well, let's jump in. So this is like I have done several of these interviews, and I just find them incredibly fascinating. They go down many different rabbit holes, but we have 4 sort of key questions. So I want to make sure we cover off all 4. And the first one is, where does your journey with cannabis begin? We want to understand like what brought you to where you are now, what helped you get there. It could be your personal background, education, career, personal life, etc.
For
Go.
sure. I would say that I've been consuming cannabis for probably like at least over 25 years. Like I started late, late high school type thing. Um, Probably like around 18, 19, around that time. And anytime I like indulged, it was always with other people. Like I never knew how to roll my own joint. I didn't know how to do any of those things. I dated guys that always smoked. So that was sort of my thing.
Mhm.
And then as I aged and progressed, I would have friends that also really consumed a lot. So friends of mine would just roll me joints and things like that. So I always sort of had access to it, but I never purchased. I could go without. It wasn't really that sort of a
We're a
thing,
social
but
smoker.
very, very, very social. And then it wasn't until about 5.5 years ago when I had a car accident.
Mm.
And that's when my cannabis use went from just sort of recreational and social to also medicinal. So I chose when I had the car accident to have to use cannabis as my pain management. as opposed to using opioids, pharmaceuticals, that type of thing, right? So I was living in Calgary, Alberta at the time, and I'm a mom of 3 sons. So I wanted to, and I am divorced. So I wanted to make sure that I had all my ducks in a row. So I went to Natural Health Services at the time, and I got myself they called it then a recommendation from a doctor. They didn't really call it a prescription, but it still acted as a prescription. And I signed up with an LP. Afria was the first LP that I ever signed up with, and got my medication delivered to my door. And that was how I was able to even
By Canada Post?
By Canada Post. Yes, I
24 hours
did.
or less? Did you
Yes.
have turnaround time? Yes. Those early days.
I did. That was then. And this was before legalization, but of course our medical program has been around for since 2001, 2002 or something like that. So
the Natural Health Service, I think, was a real pivotal point. Did you see Dr. Mason? I'm just wondering if we had
I think it was Dr. Mason, because like he was like he was like one of the first doctors to like sign up with it, because I went to my personal family physician who wasn't very interested in partaking in that, and so I just did my own research and found out about Natural Health Services and went that route. And it really did help. Like, what I loved about cannabis, to be honest with you, is that I still was aware that I had pain, but it was just allowed me to function, right? Like so it was like it was really, really numbed out, but I still knew it was there. And the reason why I liked that is that I feel like with opioids, like from what I've heard, it just kind of erases the pain, and then that can cause you to hurt yourself. You know what I mean? Because if you think that you're totally fine, you start overexerting yourself. But for me, I kind of always knew, like, my low back was really tender, my neck was blah, 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 but I was able to work and function, right? So,
but at the level that was appropriate for the healing of your body, like that,
absolutely,
know that you were still like, I'm saying this because this is how the same realization that I had. Like I had what I thought was a lower back, like muscle spasms for so long, and I just couldn't. They were giving me naproxen, and then all the other harder stuff. The naproxen was literally killing my stomach intestines. They don't tell you back day over day for months in a row. No, that's not on the bottle. But then they wanted to give me opioids, but I had a morphine allergy that I had found out when I was pregnant with my daughter. So I was never wanted to get on opioids.
Okay.
So for me, that was sort of this, okay, no, I can't do that because I have an extreme reaction. I'm not like super, I mean, I could die. Yeah. It's like I get overdosed really easily with a normal amount.
Yeah.
And I actually learned about that when I was in childbirth, when I literally was in a coma. But that was for me the realization where I want to be able to know that I still have an injury without the discomfort of that piece of it, because you want your body to still heal. And if you don't have pain, you forget. You're like, I can go out and run a marathon, or do a million things. And as we were just talking before, as women, like, you kind of tend to take on more.
So many things. Absolutely, as it is, right? Yeah. So I just didn't want to get that route, and to be honest with you, like getting that prescription was still a process, right? So I still had to use sort of, for me, I used like over-the-counter medication to kind of like get by until I was getting all my ducks in a row. And then I had to go and get medication to counteract the medication I was taking because my stomach was getting all messed up, right? So it just like, it doesn't even make sense.
Drug companies love you. You're just a perfect repeat customer, right?
Right? Like, I mean,
over and over and over again, and not like getting anywhere.
Like a hamster in a wheel kind of thing, just spinning, right? So I was glad when everything sort of turned out. And when I ended up getting my prescription, it was like the talk about Canada becoming like having recreational use be legalized, the talk was happening, right? So that's sort of where I kind of started to think, okay, well, I'm using this for medicine. I have used it for recreation for all the years. And, I believe that recreation use is still therapeutic use because it was helping.
You haven't gotten a prescription for the harder shit
Exactly.
First. You're winning because no doctor has put you on a chart that says you need something harder.
Exactly. You
I
know, but I didn't even realize it until I really made the conscious effort to use it for medicinal, is when I started to think like, oh, it was like chilling me out all the time. I'm a mom of 3, like it was helping me not to pop off and be like so ridiculous. Like I'm just starting to realize like all the things that it was helping me with throughout the years. And that's why I was always like a supporter of it, and knew that, you know, if it can help me feel better, you
yeah.
know, like the pain was horrible at the beginning, especially, I'm going to go this route. Right. But getting into the industry, like I was watching what was happening. I was in Calgary at the time. And for me, being a Black woman and knowing that it was going to become legal, and seeing that some of the players were cis white males, and I was like, you know, so many Black and brown Indigenous people have been so disenfranchised by our war on drugs, etc. I'm like, I want to get into this industry, and you know what I mean, and be able to get some income from this, because I don't want just a certain demographic to, you know, profit off of this, right? So that's kind of where it came from. And Calgary was not, even though we had like, it wasn't that difficult to get that prescription through natural health services. A lot of my friends kind of thought I was like crazy to like want to get into the industry. I was like, I'm moving to Vancouver, I'm going to do it. And they kind of thought I was like a little cuckoo. But I moved, you know, I moved right before legalization. I was here probably about 8 months before it was legalized. And uh, Vancouver had that gray market for 10 years, right? So it was a whole different like atmosphere. It was so like welcomed, and there was a real industry going on, and blah, blah, blah. So I
Dispensaries that
started,
you could smell bud, and they
oh my God,
knew what they were talking
dispensaries
about.
everywhere, like being able to walk freely and like it was just, oh, I was like, oh, I'm home. I feel so
Yeah.
like at home. And so I started I worked for the medicinal cannabis dispensary on Hastings, and
Mm,
that dispensary was like the second dispensary that was opened in Vancouver, I believe. Like some of my coworkers at that time had been working with them for 10 years.
right.
So I had a little notebook, and I
Yeah.
was like allowed to sit sometimes because my back would, you know, be sore,
Yeah.
and I would like just soak up all information from them.
Yeah.
Like they had such a wealth of
Knowledge.
knowledge.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And it's
And
not the kind of knowledge you learn in a textbook. It's like
no,
working with
no.
people that have like problems, and then kind of troubleshooting day by
Yes,
day what's going to
yes,
work, right? Like
yes.
that's the kind of knowledge you're gaining, is experiential knowledge that you're trying to
Oh,
absorb, but without having been in the experience.
absolutely. It
It's
was
impossible to
fantastic.
capture in a book.
It was so, it like, I wasn't there for a really long time, but like it was, I think 6 to 8 months or something I was there, and I had it's such a wealth of knowledge. And then from there I went to work for Aurora, and again I was with Aurora before legalization. So I was more on the medical side of things. So dealing with like patients and who were getting their prescriptions from doctors who didn't know anything
Right?
about anything and would call us
You were
out.
on the client services side, like on the phone.
Yes,
I've
I was on the
probably
client.
talked to you a couple times. I was like Aurora patient. I still have the card, like the original.
Oh, I remember I had that, the embossed.
Yeah,
Yes.
with the lights, the
Yes.
northern lights on them.
Yeah.
And I remember, so I love the Aurora stories, because it's like that was a huge pivotal moment in my own personal journey.
Yeah.
Was I got a tip from one of my husband's friends who was in the banking world. You know, he's like, if you like the cannabis stuff, you should really check out this company that's about to be publicly traded.
Yes.
So he gave me a stock tip pre-IPO. Guess what I bought on the day that we went public? A shit ton of shares. There was
Because
very
back then
popular.
they were so great back, like I mean I'm not, you know, whatever, but like
They
back
started
then,
with the heart in the right place. Like I have to
yeah.
say, like I remember getting the packet. I still have the box. So they brought everything came in these really nice, like kind of look like a mini shoebox, like with the
Yes.
size, and then they had the symbols around, like the birds.
Yes.
And I remember like thinking, like this is beautiful. Like this is
Yes.
well done. And you
Yes.
know, the bud was like, I mean, compared to,
I know.
but
Yeah.
it was legal. It came
It
by
was legal.
post.
And I will say, at least for like the Edmonton, Calgary area, like they back then they had teamed up with like couriers, so you could even
Yeah,
get it same day
yeah.
if you ordered at a certain. Because BC, we didn't, even though I worked for them, I didn't get that opportunity, right?
Right,
Because
right.
we
Yeah, no,
didn't
I
have
was in
it.
the postal region that they could
Yeah,
they delivery. It was like 3 postal codes. So that was like,
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, those were good times. And I guess I should probably, like, I totally forgot to mention that, like, when I had that car accident, I had another business and it was a food business. It was called Wings and Tings. I was in a farmer's market, at the Crossroads Farmers Market year round. I did, Reggae Fest, Taste of Calgary, catering, all this, that kind of stuff.
What was the
And
food?
when I had,
Jamaican patties and stuff like
yeah,
Jamaican.
I did Jamaican patties,
Love
jerk
it.
chicken wings, all that kind of jazz. But that car accident did not allow me to work in the same capacity that I was working. So that was another reason why I wanted to shift out of that
On
industry
your
per
feet,
se.
like
Yeah,
food, like service industry all day long.
yeah, yeah,
And that's
pretty much.
backbreaking labor, right? Like
Yeah, it
12 to
is.
14 hours cleaning and then cooking and then dealing with people all day long and then health inspectors coming in. And then I don't
Absolutely.
know if you were there when this happened, but the Crossroads Market, I remember there was a shooting. There was, or not a shooting, there was a holdup that someone held up.
I
Like
heard,
it was probably around that time, like
yes,
2017, maybe, because I remember we were there. We were there, like we went to the Crossroads Market in the summer for pickles. My husband would make pickles. I mean, he had to touch every cucumber to make the pickles. It was like his ritual of like
yeah,
squeezing every one to find the right, find that. So we were there like at the other side, and like honest to God, like this is why it's so memory. My memory of this is so crystal. Is because they used this pepper spray or stink bomb or something. The police used some kind of scent that
yes,
was offensive to clear out the criminals who were
yes,
holding up one of the stores there at gunpoint or something, trying to rob them.
yeah,
I remember like we were there at that day. It was like a Sunday afternoon or something around that time. And I remember it like it was like we literally were like walking from the farmers market side where it's like all outside in
yep,
tents, and then we were like walking through because we were going to go get food. We always did the same route where we started off with like chongos and like all the
yes,
market stuff, and like we knew the chongos guy was another poker guy, and like we knew
yes,
everybody, and then
yes,
we'd go and get food and like pick up sort of the special of the day and go home. And my daughter really liked the mac and cheese from the mac and cheese, and my husband and I would always pick something different and to try. So
yeah,
I'm probably your booth was probably in that area. And I
yes.
remember we walked through and it was like the smell was like potent and irritating, and my eyes, there was nobody around. I'm like, what the heck is going on? And someone had literally, this had just happened, and I'm like, fuck, like let's get the hell out of here. Like I don't want to be here anymore. So that just came to my mind because it was a
Yep.
very like potent thing. I digress.
Oh yeah. It was a fun time though there, but I couldn't do it anymore
No.
because I
So
just
when
couldn't.
was the car accident? What year?
It was 2015,
Okay, so yeah.
May 2015. Yeah.
And so the Crossroads, yeah, I mean, that's a cool place. I mean, I don't even know what's going to happen with that now with COVID and stuff, but there was so much culture going on there that would have been, those are the kinds of places that I would like cannabis to be at.
Oh, I know, right? Oh,
Vendor, like that's the
absolutely.
place where it should be.
Absolutely.
Whether we
100.
get there or not, question mark.
I'm hoping there will be a day where it will become, because I mean, I've seen wine at fruit wines at farmers markets, right? You know what I mean? So I would hope that we get to that level where it can be just as normalized as alcohol,
Yeah,
right?
and like Jay Webb has a whole corner section at the main
Exactly.
market, like
Yeah.
that world has figured itself out, and hopefully we're gonna get to go down that path.
I think in time we will, because the more that people use it and realize that it's not as threatening as they thought it was, because they were fed, all this propaganda. It's a lot of times people are don't use it, right? Like, so they make their assumptions based on what they've been told, and it's not
100%.
really
What they've
always.
been told or what they've seen only visually. And
Absolutely.
honestly, this is part of my next question is like, when did you realize that cannabis has become part of your daily life? As in like, was there a positive or a negative stigma associated with that from other people or otherwise?
So even when I lived in Calgary, like because Calgary is like a drinking place, right? Like, I mean, people enjoy their wine, they enjoy their
Yeah, there's a big
beers.
craft beer.
Craft beer is
Yeah.
huge. Like, that is the thing. And I was in the food game, so like it was a lot of, like, I even did a wings and wine event, okay? Because like, I mean, we Calgarians love to drink, but even still, like I was one of the very few amongst my friends that was always known to also have cannabis with me, and nobody ever said anything or whatever. Like I never ever felt ostracized or anything. But when I moved to Vancouver, though,
Mhm.
the scene and the vibe was, it's just so different. And there's still a lot of like, you know, when you're trying to rent a place, like there's a lot of times you'll see in the ad they don't want somebody who consumes cannabis, they don't
Right.
want any vape. So it's not like it's not here either, but still there's so much more openness around it as well. Like I've never had a problem walking around the streets smoking it even before legalization. It
Right.
just never
But what
an
about like people in your like your family or your like
they
you're doing?
down to even so when I had to introduce it like that, it was a regular use with my sons because they
Mhm.
were like
Little
teenagers and preteen at the time.
minors
It
still.
was more that I was like speaking of it on the medicinal side of
Right.
things because I'm like, I'm using this for pain management. You're going to see me consume it all the time. So the minute that I was using it for pain management is also when people shifted like
Mhm.
whatever preconceived ideas they would have, because at the end of the day, like I'm going to use something,
Right.
right? Like I'm not going cold turkey to
Yeah.
try to deal with pain without anything, right? So once people knew that I was using it for pain management, it kind of didn't, I didn't feel anything. But
And
I
you
will
weren't
say
working
that
at that time at Aurora yet, were you?
no, I wasn't working that time at Aurora. And I will be honest, like the jobs and the industries that I was in Calgary was around a lot of creative people. Like
Mhm.
I worked for Avenue Magazine and I
Right.
worked for the National Music Center and I worked
Cool.
for a stock photography company. So when you're around creatives, it's
Yeah.
not foreign to like
Yeah.
creative people.
It's part of the
So
creative process for most of them. And like,
yeah, right. Like, so I think that's also why I didn't have an issue
right.
either. But
You
when
were
I moved,
incorporated.
yeah, but when I moved to Vancouver, I would say that it became more of my lifestyle
Mhm.
because back then, even like I'm working in a dispensary where um, I could get infused lemonade, I can get all of the infused edibles, I can get like, you know, a board of 50 different cultivars on the board. Like there was just so much, like you became like an enthusiast and a
Right.
connoisseur, right? Like,
It's important.
so yeah, and then I mean, you know, in my former business, I was, you know, cooking, so it just became easy. To be honest with you, I didn't think I was going to do food at all ever again when I moved here, but I bumped into a lot of people that knew me from Calgary. And they're
Mhm.
like, "Oh my gosh, are you going to do food again?" Like blah
Mhm.
blah blah. And so then as I was getting connected to the cannabis community, I started to use my cooking talents and then married the two, and then it just, you know, living here, it's easy to live, breathe, and eat and drink it and
Yeah,
and
so
all of it.
I want to ask you because you're from Jamaica originally, right? Were you born in?
No, my parents are from Jamaica. I'm born and raised Toronto, which
Oh, okay.
which is still close because I lived in a neighborhood that like I would say maybe 8, 9 blocks away, like was Little Jamaica. Like I lived near Eglinton Avenue West. I could walk there. So like as a kid, like I could go to Jamaican stores and get anything that I wanted just
Awesome.
like that, right?
So my question about this is, so I the only time I went to Jamaica was on my honeymoon,
Mm.
and learned that it's not legal to use cannabis at all in that country. And I don't know
It
where
was
they're at now. I know they're working on it, but
oh
it's
they're legal, yeah, so they decriminalized it now,
right.
and you
Okay.
can yeah, and they do have a dispensary, and they and now it's even as a tourist
Yeah.
you can, like even with me having a medical, like I could go and easily get what I needed in a store there. So it's different now, but back then no, it wasn't. It
So
was very
here's where my question around this, because so I was on my honeymoon in 2006 and 7. It was
yeah
actually the worst record weather of the Caribbean ever.
at that time. Oh no.
It was February, and the orange groves in Florida were freezing,
Oh my
and they
goodness.
had to close the shelters for the animals because the animals were dying. It was so cold they didn't have heat in Florida, and
Oh
we were
my.
getting on a cruise ship in Miami, heading to Jamaica, and they canceled every excursion, including water ones, because the waves were there was so much surf, like it was too crazy of weather for us to do normal cruise
Thanks.
ship activities.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we haul up in Jamaica, and I had pre-arranged not to do like a tour with the regular cruise ship people, but I'd actually, my cousin, who's actually from Vancouver, she had told us she'd been there recently and hired like a taxi driver to like take you around to the cool places, and like we got some Jamaican patties and jerk chicken and some ginger beer. And we
Yeah.
climbed the Dunn's River Falls with the
Yes.
guide up the middle, which was torture. I would never do
Yeah.
it. Go around the outside, don't pay anyone, just do the outside with the holding hands. Anyways, we were fully expecting to be able to light up a joint like the second we got off the cruise ship. And apparently some people can do that, but the driver that we hired was the brother of the police department or police chief.
Oh
It
no.
just happened to be that the one person we chose to take us around was the least one. Like,
Oh no.
so it was,
That's unfortunate because I have smoked in Jamaica and it was the best high I've ever had.
so I missed that part, but I talk about, you know, the experience of what I would have liked to, or imagined I would have had with the herbal goods cones, which is a product that I am near and dear to my heart. And I represent them because it slows things down, not just from the cannabis but because it's like a natural, slow burning ebony leaf cone.
Oh, nice. Okay.
These. They're in the stores. Spiritleaf has them in the stores, and a bunch of like stores in Canada carry them. Actually, the owners of this company are in Vancouver.
Okay, awesome.
They're based out of there. Anyway, so we're just talking about this because they are on their 11th Kickstarter campaign, and they can't put this product on Kickstarter. They have other products that are all like meditative and self-healing kinds of things, and they can't do this because it's paraphernalia, and it's not okay yet for things like Kickstarter. But the reason why I bring this up is that I imagine that if I had gotten the ability to smoke a joint in the home of Bob Marley, in the place where Rastafarian is a religion, and you are embracing the plant as if it is a god, which I think it should be considered sometimes. It is respect the plant all day long.
Always.
This particular piece of, I'm going to call it symbol or whatever, icon, I think is the right word from a religious perspective. When you feel this with high quality bud, it slows down the whole process because it's slow burning and you don't have to keep lighting it.
Yeah.
It's also a very light smoke, which is not like a blunt, which is what it looks like. And so there's sort of these disconnects around it's a concept that I keep talking about a lot, because both in cannabis, the stigma is about people think things are going to be a certain way. And when they're either positively reinforced, then check, you're a stoner, okay, everything I know is true. Or if you're completely opposite, because like me, when I'm presenting things about the plant or about my businesses to like investors or other people, the fact that I say, you know, I have an MBA, I sold for Xerox, I had a 6-figure salary for a long time, and I was high performing sales exec for these big companies, they say you're extremely credible. You don't look like what we think you're going to be talking about.
Exactly.
Because you're not a stoner. And I'm like, exactly. This is exactly the point. And that's why I talk about these symbols, because I believe that everybody should be able to slow their brains down. And this kind of smoke is like that, in the sense that it reminds me of sitting on the beach in Jamaica. Like, I did get to do that, but not with a joint in my hand. And it slows down, you can just sit there and enjoy the feeling of the surf and the sand and some bongo drums. And this is what I mean, is that I can get that experience in wherever I am with this particular thing, even though I have never actually had that experience. But it's enough for me to take me there, to, you know, take it to that place and enjoy it and be present and in the moment. I just think it's, you know, to the conversation we've been having about, you know, our lives are moving so friggin' fast and things are constantly changing. And I think that cannabis is an answer in that it just slows you down. And that's
I love that
thing.
I love that about it. And, you know, I talked a lot about the fact that I used it for pain management. I've used it recreationally, but in all honesty and fairness, like, I just tell it to do what I want it to do before I consume, right? Like, sometimes it is to be creative. Sometimes it is because I don't want to think about anything. Sometimes it is because I want to sleep and have a really sound sleep. Sometimes it's because of pain. Like, there's just so many different,
with intention, though. It's like whatever that thing is, you've sort of set out your intention, and
absolutely.
I think it sort of doesn't matter what that is, and it doesn't matter what the cultivar is. I think this is another problem. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the current now way. So you're talking about the dispensary system in the sort of gray area of Vancouver. Well, now fast forward to 2021.
Yeah, I know, crazy.
The legal recreational like retail environment is completely like removed all of those good parts of the system and made it more like an Apple store or a Starbucks or whatever. Not even a Starbucks. You can't even get an individualized experience with your name on it because everyone's supposed to be treated like neutral. Like,
Right.
But this is what I mean is that we've lost that in the way that we've done it. And I'm curious if you have felt that. And I wanted to ask you about that because you worked at Aurora and how that experience was for you. Like, it wasn't inside the building or inside the corporation that was part of it, or like, I'm kind of curious about how that either changed your feeling or whatever. Tell me more about that.
So I will say that when I first started with Aurora, like, you know, at the beginning, like, it was very big on the culture, right? Like, it was very big on, at least that was the feeling that I got. Like, even the staff members, a lot of the people in sort of client care were consumers. Good. So we were medical patients, we were recreational patients, whatever you want to call us, but we were daily consumers. We understood the plant. We had been around the plant for many years, so it was a different vibe of people. And then I spent just a few months there, probably about 4, and then I moved into more of their corporate side of things. So I moved into procurement. And so when I worked in procurement, and then at that time, we were heavily like under sort of the finance department. When you start working in those departments, you find out that there's less people that consume. Right. So this is what happens, like, when you scale up these businesses and you get really large and et cetera, that you don't, and it's not filled with as many consumers as you think. Right. A lot of times people are working there because they're an accountant and they're apply for accountant job. Yeah. Thing, right. Which
they hired those people, by the way. Let's
well, it's necessary. It's necessary, but I would say this, like, you know, at the time that I left was, you know, there was like, I had survived 2 layoffs. Right. You know what I mean? They really had to downsize, because now it's like, a lot of Aurora is not the only one, but it's happened to a lot of these big companies. They spent a lot in the beginning stages. They thought that this was going to be an industry that was so lucrative, blah, 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 but they just set it up wrong. So it couldn't, you know, I believe it couldn't actually give them what they wanted in terms of that revenue, because it just was like created wrong. So I was still there. And then I left in November, and you know, that was around the time when they got a new CEO, and the new CEO wasn't a consumer. And, you know, the closest he really had to was, I believe, his dog took CBD. And I find that when you are in an industry like this, you know, it what does it say when you don't consume it, right? Like, what does it say?
Like, I mean, even in a business sense. So look, I totally get what you're saying, but I want to flip that on its head for 1 second, because I think this is really true in business in general. So I've been an entrepreneur myself for a while. All of them, like, I'm going to say, they were all learning experiences, and I went back to my day job, let's say, really in the end. But what I learned in all of them was that I was either an entrepreneur or then as a business person, if I was my own customer, like if I was the customer of the things that I was selling or the things that I was trying to sell, 100% success, because I could at least put my head in the head of the people that would be buying this product. And in business, I think that's 100% success rate in general. Like, if you're a customer of your own product, you at least have the sense of being able to be like wrapping your head around the problems that their customers would face, or could at least, you know, rationalize that from a consumer's perspective. And in business, and I did my MBA at Queen's, and it was an accelerated MBA in 1 year, in the year of legalization of cannabis was when this happened. 2018 is when I was in class for this, which was an amazing opportunity, because I got to put on my medical cannabis hat with Dr. Mason prescribing things for me, and, you know, and Hart Steinfeld being my pharmacist, and getting the doors to Aurora while I was going through an MBA.
Yes.
And what I recognized, like, we did that in a year. And the way that we did an MBA in a year is by looking at the failures of every other company or every big failure of business. So like the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal was, I personally studied that in detail. How did this company fail yet still manage to still be in business and is still making vehicles? Like what happened there?
Right.
And every episode of Dirty Money was actually one of the case studies. That's on Netflix. It's a series. And it was very fascinating way of looking at businesses. Let's look at all the ways it failed and let's try not replicate them like as an overarching theme. It's not like they said that to us when we got here, that when we got there, like, we're going to teach you how to be a masters of this by showing you all the ways that it doesn't work.
Right.
It was sort of like the tying it together at the end. But what I'm realizing is that was a really good way to spot the failures early on in the current business environment. And in cannabis, which I chose to pursue myself, I was seeing them early on, not necessarily from inside the companies, but from their public information, like their stock trader information. And as they were treating their shareholders with utmost importance over their customers, that's the second where we all know that shareholders are important. Of course, they're the owners of the company, but they're also transactional shareholders. They're not really in it for anything more than their money. The customers of a business, on the other hand, are the lifeblood of a business. So if you can't at least put yourself in the head of your customer, you have no chance of success. So now here I sit.
Especially in cannabis.
Especially in cannabis, because if you don't understand why people are using this plant for some reason, and there's thousands of reasons, like to my first question is, what brought you to this plant? The answer to that is infinite.
Yes.
And I've heard everything under the sun. Like there has been a lot of different answers in the previous Truth on Cannabis stories, yet let alone my life experience. And not all of them are about personal use. Some of them is that someone close to them. Some of them, it was actually a business decision. Like Earl Oliver talks in his interview, he put 300 grand into a cannabis company that wasn't doing anything with his money other than trying to steal it. So he just got his ass to Canada to figure out, like, what are you doing with my money? I need to know. Like, so there's motivations there from different perspectives, but until you get yourself inside the consumer's position, and intentionally, you don't have a business or not a sustainable business.
Yeah. I totally agree. My whole thing was, I was very shocked because as the higher you get up into sort of the corporate levels, the less of consumption that you see. And so my whole thing is that because there's the industry, but there's the culture, right? And the culture is what feeds the industry, because especially the way that our dispensaries and are set up, they're not set up to be able to give you any information. So who are you really speaking to? Because if you're speaking to the old people that have been in the game for a while, then you got to speak to the culture. If you're speaking to new people, then you got to have education. So it can't be like what
no
are we
man's
doing
land.
here,
It's
right? Yeah, like
it's a nice looking store. Check mark. Like, a nice looking store doesn't pay the bills, man.
No, it doesn't. It totally doesn't. And so my whole thing is that, I feel that if you're going to be in this industry and run a company, that you should connect to the plant in some way, shape, or form. Now, I feel like my personal favorite way to consume is smoking. I cook with cannabis. I'm a cannabis chef. Yes, all of that. I love doing that. But my ultimate first go-to is rolling a joint. Second is vaping, and then cooking, and so on and so on and so forth, right? But whatever way that you are comfortable, I feel is where you should create a relationship. So if you don't want to smoke, then maybe you want to try a topical, and maybe that helps you. Maybe it's a beverage. Maybe it's just growing one seed to plant and gifting that to somebody, right? And just understanding that the plant is so emotional and sensitive, and going through that life cycle, that alone, like, you don't even have to consume it. You can just grow it and see how difficult it can be to do one and harvest and then pass it on to someone else. And I think it would give you an appreciation of the plant, and you would at least be more connected to your customer.
This is the thing. That's 100%. You're 100% right. And I think this is the missing piece, is that people just think it's another commodity. It's just another thing that we can transact around. And that is not only a harm to the plant, but a harm to first of all, the millions of people that have fought this fight to make it legal on their backs and on literally their lives. But also, it's missing the point of the plant entirely. It's almost the reason why it was legalized was because we just didn't know enough, or not legalized, prohibited, the prohibition era. If you look back at like the texts on that, they literally just put it into this vault because they just didn't understand it. And it's almost like, okay, now we get that. It is very complex. And now that the vault is open and we can do research and we can do studies and we can look at data, none of that matters. It's a personal relationship to the plant that is the only thing that matters. And if you can't identify that that's central to any of this, then it's pointless. That's how I feel sometimes.
Absolutely. And then, on top, I mean, I'm learning every day, right? Like, I mean, so, just learning that we all have an endocannabinoid system, like we all have one.
Yeah, including slugs and turtles and invertebrate and fish. I learned every single living thing has an endocannabinoid system.
So, I mean, cannabis already is sort of meant to work with us to begin with.
Yeah.
So it just, so anyways, I mean, that's my whole thing about, Aurora was awesome at a time, but it just kind of, the energy shifted over time. And I decided that I wanted to do my own thing. Really, because I love doing my own thing.
Your own thing. Tell us about what is it? What's it called, and what is it?
Yeah, so I started this company called Faded Living, and basically the reason why I started it was to help normalize adult cannabis use through cooking workshops, through conversation. I started a podcast called Faded Living and Friends, and as well as through education in different ways. Like I used to do infused dining experiences called Faded Feast. I'd like to bring it back when we can gather again properly. But when I did them, I launched them last February. And basically before we would eat and enjoy a meal, I would show people how I infuse the oil, show people like, what did I use, kind of talk a little bit about it, like, answer any questions, things of that nature. Because when I do dinner parties, I don't treat it like you would an edible, right? Like I am really trying to give you think of being wrapped around with a warm blanket, I'm trying to give you that sort of cozy sort of feeling, as opposed to getting you completely like couch locked, right? Like so that you can't move. So
like, from personal experience, and please, if you tell me how you would deal with this from a I guess leading of these sessions, because personally I was not a big edible user because I never had the same experience as the other people around me. So I tended to be sort of fear infused situations, especially if I wasn't the one in control of the dose. And this is exactly what happened to me, is that I was in a situation where someone else was making a beautiful infused meal and we were all warm hugging each other in this wonderful situation, but I had no understanding of how much or what type of oil or whatever. It was in a salad dressing in the end, but it was in a salad dressing that had a ton of like lentils and other things that were, first of all, things that I don't eat a ton of like day to day. And I had such an adverse reaction. I was seriously like stoned, like blotto for 4 days after I ate that meal. In a place that I was foreign to me, foreign to everyone around. Like we were all in this like setting out in the mountains, and it was beautiful, but it was like, I literally was like, oh my God, like I was afraid because I didn't know what was going to happen, how long it was going to take. I had to drive home in my car like 4 hours away. So like, this is the thing, is that infused dinners are great, but how do you take that experience to an individual experience?
So that's kind of why I talk beforehand, and it's really to kind of get people comfortable, because at the end, I give people numbers. I tell them what I'm working with. I tend to do really low dose because in Canada, our edibles are only, we only have a really low dose max anyways. So I just always try to keep within the guidelines, even though there's nothing in place yet for infused dining experiences. But that's kind of what I do. I start off with a low dose oil, but at the same time, my cooking also includes things that would diffuse your high. So for instance, I will include a salad that has like mandarin in it. And for a lot of people, citrus can help them feel less high, right? I will have like maybe a cocktail with CBD, maybe at the beginning, so that, or in between the meal, right? So that sort of helps to counteract. I have stations around that have like sliced oranges, CBD, so that people can know where they can get something you know, especially black pepper. I know that there might not be scientific study to a lot of these things, but I will say it has helped a lot of people feel um,
That's high.
break their high or feel more
I've
comfortable.
heard
You
that
know,
actually. The black
the
pepper.
black pepper, yeah. So I tell people about all of that, and it's available around so that, you know, if you're feeling uncomfortable, you don't have to like say anything to anybody. You can just
Right.
go to the area that you
Right.
you see them
And
all
it's
over the place.
available and they understand how it
Yes.
works. Yeah, so that's amazing. So
Yeah.
this was a, and that's something I worry about, you know, because I think everybody's endocannabinoid system I have now learned about my own through an epigenetics testing, which is very fascinating. And
Wow.
that was, it connects to your DNA. And I
Okay.
learned that personally, I have a plethora of CB1 receptors in certain places in my body, which is different from person to person. And mine are particularly high concentration because of the, I guess, the singularity of my genetic lineage. And that's unique. Like there's not a lot of people that are really from one point in the world. You know, that's a rare concept in this day and age, where most people are sort of more general, you know, ancestry or more blended, I guess. So
Mhm.
to me, it, once I did the epigenetics, the whole course basically explained like what is my genetics and why it's different than I guess the standard deviation of people. And
Okay.
that was like a mind-blowing experience because I have had extreme reactions, not just to cannabis, but to medication, to food, lots of things. I am not the norm, and I've always
Mhm.
known that. So that's why I wanted to do this test. But once I learned about your genetics maps to your endocannabinoid system, because that is a direct, that's something you can test for.
Absolutely.
It was like an eye-opening experience as to why edibles are just not, I just have a different reaction than other people do.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's a
And
very individual experience.
it totally is, and that's one of the reasons why, like I had said, like I do like to give a like, you know, the strain that I've used, you know, what was the THC content, you know, how much did I use in the oil and all that. But I say to people, I'm like, still, like, even though I can give you all this information, and you could have been at another dinner or had another edible with that same information, it could
Yeah,
still treat, you could still be affected differently. So
exactly.
that's why I am always like, I'm here to kind of, I incorporate things to counteract a high anyways throughout the meal so that it's not too much. And at the same time too, I give you all the areas in where we're, you know, in having dinner, all the points. It's kind of like when you're on an airplane, you know where your exit, you know what
Yeah,
I mean? You know how to safely, I kind of do that for you in
yeah,
the
that's
dining
great.
experience, because
It's amazing.
even if I give you all the information, it still could affect you a little differently. So that, so
Yeah.
at least you know what you have to help you, right?
Exactly. And so here's a question for you. So this is why I believe the system that we currently have in the legal cannabis world in Canada is set to fail, really, based on the previous things we mentioned. But it's that base understanding that there is no balance of information that anybody can give anybody that will give them the answer. So even for doctors, like doctors look at how drugs interact with people as a math, you know, a mass study of information and a bunch of data points that looks like a standard deviation curve where there's a bunch of people in the middle and then there's outliers. I believe that the cannabis plant, based on my own learnings about it myself, has a one-to-one connection with each person individually. And there
100.
is no standard deviation around a strain or anything. It is a, and so that is a completely paradoxical shift that most people I'm learning in the industry, in the front lines of the industry, in the data part of the industry, in the head of corporations in the industry, in the shareholder, all of those things do not get that. They're still thinking that it's going to be like a medicine, that they're going to have a balance of research. It's going to say, yes, it's good for X. And the research is going to say non-conclusively anything because the way that we research things doesn't allow for an individual to be connected to something like this is.
Absolutely. And that's why even when I was on sort of the client care medical side of things, when I was with Aurora, even when I worked in the dispensary, I always had to, I always said this, like, this is how it affects me. This is what it does for me. But you're going to have to get a journal and you're going to have to do the work and you're going to have to try. It's a trial and error. There are a lot of, like, number one, cannabis isn't for everyone. Like, even though I love it, I live, breathe, and, you know, it works like for me, it isn't for everyone. Right. So I'm very aware of that. Number two, not every cultivar is for everyone.
Right.
right? So you have to like trial and error. You gotta, and just because one doesn't work for you doesn't mean the other plethora of cultivars that are out there can't help, right? So this is where people are very conditioned to being told exactly what to do, being
Right.
told you need to take it X number of times a day and it's going to do blah blah blah. But even when your doctor tells you that, there's still the percentage of people that it still doesn't affect in that very same way. So
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you kind of have to just do the work now, and I think that that's exciting to be able to take power of and control of like what works for you, and to really understand what, you know what I mean, to pinpoint what works. I think that that's so empowering.
It's awesome. Exactly. I love it too. I love it that we have that ability. And the only thing is that I guess the people that hold the stigma around is that doctors are sometimes not very supportive because they've already prescribed you a bunch of other stuff. And in order to really get the benefits of cannabis, sometimes you have to remove those from your system, which is a very long, painful, extremely situations that it's just sometimes doctors are just don't want to do that. They don't have any training on how to get people off drugs. That's like
Yeah,
not part of it. But anyways, we'll leave that for another day. I wanted to wrap up with your last piece here
for
on what
sure.
does the future hold. We've talked about some good, some bad, some different pieces. You know, is it up? Is it down? Is it neutral? What's your thoughts on the future for yourself, your business, and the cannabis industry?
Well, I'm hoping that with, so my business is brand spanking new, and I'm all about like trying to get the education out, teach people how to, if COVID has taught me one thing, that we should at least know how to do things for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't mean that just because you learn how to do something for yourself, it means that you're never going to support other people who do it really well or even better than you do. But
Mm-hmm.
I think we should know how to do stuff. I think we should all know how to grow one plant at least. Like, I mean, I'm working on it myself. This is going to be my third year trying again. I've killed, you know, clones the first year. Last year it was better, and this year will probably be better and better. You know, I think we should learn how to do that, so that we really know when we're buying product what's good and what isn't good, right? Like, at least I think that that helps. I think that when it comes to like cooking with cannabis, my whole um, goal is to try to teach people that it can actually be easy, it can be very safe, you know what I mean? And as long as you start low and go slow, and work with the cultivars that work well with you when you smoke it or consume in whatever way that you
Yep.
like,
Yep.
then I think that's a good start, right? I mean, I think that you can really, you know, have an infused pasta, have infused chili or soup and whatever, and really, you know, add value to your day, right? And especially for me, like, I'm 45, and I know that, like I mentioned, I love to smoke, but over time, I'm not going to always be able to smoke, right? And sometimes you're not in positions that you can smoke.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to like train myself to appreciate the other ways that you can consume the plant, so that it's not, you know what I mean, and so that I'm like familiar with it, right?
Yeah, and then you have other options so
Yeah.
that you can get what you need. Yeah, I think that's totally true. And the whole, so just back to one piece that you said, I really like the keeping a journal. Like, I think that is not being done enough. Even myself, I get angry at myself when I'm like, what was that one that I really like that? What was that called? And I bug my husband because he's the one rolling my joints. I don't roll joints, but he's really good at it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what did we have that night? It was really good. I went and did a really cool drawing and flow and everything. So I need to do that better. And you reminded me of that. And I just don't feel that those are the things that are missing from the industry, is how do
Yep.
we keep track of what we like? You know, there's
Absolutely.
been apps and things, but I feel like just going back to the old school, like keep a notebook with a little pen in it and write
That's
it
what
down.
I have. I literally have a notebook, and I'm trying to get to a level where I am learning more about terpenes so that I can, because you're learning that there are the healing properties of terpenes themselves that are out, you know, already, right? So you
And
got
the
your limonene.
terpene piece is
It's
super,
huge.
it's very accessible, particularly to women, because women
Yes,
are familiar with essential oils. They're using
yes.
their witch's brew of their. I have so many friends, Young Living, doTERRA. They have little pouches in their purses, and they're putting it all over.
So
There's a
they know all about it, and that's why, so to break that stigma, that's why I'm like, oh, why don't I like really like learn about these terpenes and pick a strain that is heavy on that terpene, then pick a recipe that makes that terpene shine. And here you've got a really great, you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
that's sort of what I want to do. I want to be able to sort of get that information out to people. You know, I'll be launching my website, fadedliving.com, in the next few weeks. So I'll be having workshops that I'll be doing myself through my site. And then I'm also partnered with an organization of cannabis educators called Educanation. So I will be doing some cooking with cannabis with the terpene spotlight per session kind of thing with them. But that's kind of what I kind of want to do is get that focus on the terpenes, because people, I mean, there are some people that deny that terpenes don't exist, but I believe that they exist. They're found in so many other things outside of cannabis. And
Yeah.
so
And they,
that helps you. I know.
DOA has a terpene analysis as an option, and if you don't check it, you're an idiot as a grower
Right?
because you want to know how much terps are in there. That's
Thank
the good
you.
stuff. Awesome.
Thank you. Right? So, I mean, I'm just hoping to like get that education out there. I feel like people are not fearful of food, and I know that not everybody has great experiences with edibles, but I always remind people that don't forget, like, lots of times our experiences with edibles, like the whole intent was to be this saturated item to kind of get you quote unquote fucked up. You know what I mean? Like it
Put you
was
to sleep,
really,
really.
yeah, right. And whereas like the intent of somebody who's doing, at least for me, who's doing a dinner, it's not to get you feeling that way. In fact, not all of the items are usually infused. A lot of times it's a dressing or a gravy or something like that. So you can even, you know, take as much as you'd like.
Yeah.
I love doing chutneys.
Yeah, yeah.
Chutneys are great
I
because then
love
you
it.
can just, yeah. So yeah, I just want to get the education out there, help break that stigma. We are legalized in this country, so let's start acting like it. So yeah.
Love it. Nicole, this was fantastic. You've basically answered all of my questions. Is there any other last words you'd like to say? We'll definitely put your website into the notes at the bottom afterwards to share with people.
Absolutely. And yeah, and you can always find me on, I was lucky, I was able to get at Faded Living on all my social channels.
Nice.
So you can, yeah, it's pretty awesome. I'm like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the
You
things.
keep talking about cannabis on those channels. They've been pretty good
Yes.
for some other people, but we'll share more about that in the Green Book, which is one
Yes.
project to be launched, which is essentially a industry social networking or networking platform, so that the
Hey.
things shutting them down. But that's we're working on that, so we'll keep that for next conversation. But thank you so much, Nicole. This was fantastic.
Thank you so much.
I love it. I'm glad I caught you, and I'm just gonna.
Yes.